Hey there, it's Dr. Imadeline Aisha again from Cairo, Egypt. I know it's been a while, and I apologize for the way I'm dressed. It's winter, and I apologize for the lighting and how scruffy the place is. But I just got back from a screening of a movie I'd watched when I was a kid, and I just had to talk about it while it's still fresh in my head. Um, the Elephant Man by David Lynch. I went to a community group called Nazar, and they do special screenings for movies, and they've been doing a whole series on David Lynch, of course, in honor of his passing, tragic passing. A guy who still had so much left to give, and a guy who gave so much. And the previous movie was The Straight Story, which I'd heard about and I'd always wanted to watch, but I didn't have a chance to watch it. This time I got a chance to watch it. And even though it's a straightforward Disney movie, biopic, it's a David Lynch movie. It's not surrealist, but it's a David Lynch movie. The sense of magic, and every scene is not just a painting, but a painting that's alive with people and motion and color and meaning, and every scene is a question mark. And I only began to understand it better after watching The Elephant Man today. In The Straight Story, you keep having these scenes where the character, the central character, Mr. Straight, is looking up at the night sky, the stars. First with his daughter, who has Down syndrome, sadly, and then at the end with his brother. And he tells us through the story, through conversing with people, how him and his brother, they put up with extreme poverty in their childhood on the farm, partly by looking up at the stars and dreaming. And wouldn't you know it, in the David Lynch movie, in The Elephant Man, the closing scene, I watched the movie as a kid and I can remember it quite well, actually. And I loved it even back then. Now it's much more powerful and harrowing and exquisite. But I could remember the closing scene where the Elephant Man kills himself, in effect. But I couldn't remember the scene after that, where you see going up into the stars, and then he sees this kind of black orb surrounded by light, and then you see, I assume, an image of his mother, and she's telling him that there's no death, there's immortality in the skies. I assume because he's being united with her, and that would explain this whole beautiful star scene in The Straight Story, but also critically where in Dune, the alternate ending that he did, not the one that they filmed for the movie. I've seen it on YouTube, and it's almost identical to what you see in the closing scene, closing sequence of The Elephant Man. Stars and this kind of orb of light, and I assume what the stars represent, which is of course immortality, eternity, and heaven, going to paradise. And the Elephant Man, prior to that scene, is in the theater, and he's accepted finally by everybody, and he sees the theater, and it's magical. Things flying and realm of magic. And wouldn't you know it, the place where he's sitting, the balcon, there's a member of the royal family, there's the doctor and his wife. There's also one of the nurses who's dressed up, got a dress from, I think, from the wife of the doctor, played by Anthony Hopkins. And finally, you could say David Lynch's philosophy of life, a philosophy of cinema, became clear to me. In the movie, it's all about extremes of wealth and poverty. You have people at the top who are snobs and self-righteous, a lot of them, but nonetheless they're kindly people and gentle people, and they give opportunities to other people to help those less fortunate than them. The working classes, are the really destitute ones, and prey on each other. But even among them, there are good people. That's how the good people that help the Elephant Man escape when he's on the freak show in France. And the great uniter in the movie is cinema. And here in the story, it's theater, but of course you can tell for David Lynch it's cinema. It's the thing that releases you from the kind of the mundane and the grimy and incomprehensible world of everyday life, with its extremes of wealth and poverty and conflict and hatred and people not being able to communicate with each other, not being able to reach each other. Cinema is the kind of universal language. And I assume that that to him is what, and also the opening sequence of the movie, which I could remember as a kid with the mother of the Elephant Man and the elephants and her screaming, and it's a surrealist, scary scene even as an adult. But I couldn't remember the guy who owns the freak show opening that scene. Watching it, that's what happens, and you could tell. And there's similar scenes in other movies like Mulholland Drive. There's a scene there where you have not a magic show, a theater show. There's singing in Spanish, and there's a guy who does something like a magic trip, and there's smoke, and maybe somebody disappears. So that's a reference to cinema, and that's probably how David Lynch sees himself. Um, Not a cheap entertainer, but a magician, a guy who, smoke and mirrors, using illusions to communicate something to you, or to make you feel different, to make you take you to a higher plane of existence, away again from this kind of mundane world and cruel world and harsh, irrational world. David Lynch, like a lot of us, is a dreamer and a logician. He's somebody who can't live in the real world, who doesn't want to. And I completely sympathize. That's why I write science fiction. I don't know how to live in the real world. Things like traffic jams and filling out tax forms and visa, passport checkout, and crossing the road, and it shouldn't exist. Nothing makes any sense. Philip K. Dick, he was the kind of tragic example of this. I was reading about him once, and he was once given a task of writing a review about a book, a guy going fishing, and he looked at a magazine front cover with President Reagan being shot, and he just couldn't comprehend how these two things could exist in the same world. And I think David Lynch is like that. There's the world that he likes, that he grew up in, and then there's this other world behind it, hiding in plain view and eating away at that good world. And it's a good world that's full of not just good people, but also the promise of redemption. There's people who suffer and people who make terrible mistakes. Again, the straight story. And I assume straight here, it's not just the guy's name, but it's a reference to the straight and narrow path, the constant dream of salvation. And you see that in The Elephant Man, the John Merrick, who knows the Bible by heart. He read it as a child and loved it, and doesn't need to be told it again. That scene where he demonstrates that he's intelligent, he's not just repeating like a parrot and these things. And heaven to him, of course, is being accepted, having people who love him. Misses his mother. He feels that she may have abandoned him because he was ugly, he was not good enough for her, in his mind. But once he's become whole again, he goes back to her and becomes an angel. And I wasn't this emotional when I was a kid when I watched it the first time, and I loved it back then. I guess I'm getting old and sensitive. But anyway, so tracking back to Dune again, it's that's what David Lynch was trying to do. He was trying to sneak that in through the back door, and the movie has a very psychedelic. Even the finalized version, the theatrical release, does have a very psychedelic feel to it. The dream sequences that Paul Atreides have, seeing the future, when he takes the spice and he begins to space out and see other things, and when he takes the water of life to be able to see what the Emperor has in store for them, see the future and prevent it. So David Lynch gave his distinctive vision of paradise and the role of art and as a tool of salvation, along with religion, side by side with religion. And it worked. He actually made it work, despite all the problems with the movie and all the editing and the taking stuff out, and he didn't have enough money to do this, and they changed the ending and made it, I don't say corny, I like the ending with the rainfall and all that, but it's not true to the novel at all, and not something that probably David Lynch wanted. Also, watching The Elephant Man, I understood finally Eraserhead, which I didn't particularly like. I'm not actually an art house guy, and that particular thing was too art house for me. But you could see a lot of Eraserhead in Dune, particularly with the Harkonnens, the industrial side, and pollution and soot and all these things. And boy, did you see that in The Elephant Man. Yeah, and even the guy who's in Eraserhead, the one with the weird hairstyle, he's the guy who plays Nefud in Dune. He's the pilot, trusted pilot of the Baron Harkonnen. And David Lynch is very loyal to his actors. They keep popping up in his movies. The guy who plays Stilgar also pops up in the Straight Story. So yeah, yeah. What was I saying? Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, the industrial side. I mean, sorry, the light went out. I should recharge it. Yeah, what was I saying? Oh yeah, yeah. The industrial side. There's a scene where they're operating on a guy who was harmed by an industrial machine. Now I do remember that as a kid. I remember the operation, but I couldn't remember that it was a machine that had harmed the guy. And Anthony Hopkins' character commenting about how machines can't be reasoned with. I mean, so again, somebody sensitive like David Lynch and his great love of nature would be aware of machines again being this irrational thing that doesn't fit in with his vision of the world. It doesn't make any sense. It's not organic. It's not real. It's not alive. And so it's threatening and has no comprehension. It might not be evil, but it can hurt you unnecessarily so. And even another movie which I missed in Nazar, the series, but I'd watched it before, and I'd watched the extended version, which was what was it called? The one with Dennis Hopper. Ooh, oh, great! Now I've forgotten. Blue Velvet. Yeah, yeah. There you get that. I mean, you have the idyllic suburban America, small town America, with of course greenery and flowers and mowing the lawn and all, and it's very natural and organic. You don't feel boxed in by the houses or by the streets or anything like that. There's breathing spaces. It's almost like being in the countryside, and you see a lot of the countryside in the Straight Story. And then the father guy has a stroke, falls down, and you see all these beetles gnawing away in the soil, so to speak, eating away at that perfection. That little, that's it, it's a Garden of Eden. That's it, paradise on earth. And then you cut to a scene in the extended cut where you have these young people dancing, and it's blurred image. It's almost like the Beatles, and you can tell that it's young people eating away at the values of that generation, the previous generation, the generation that had fought in the Second World War and built the country, created that prosperity. And well, there's a whole bunch of other things there, but I don't want to spoil the fun. But I mean, again, David Lynch is captivated with this kind of dualistic vision of the world. There's the nice world, which is his preferred world, this tiny little bubble surrounded by corruption and violence and greed and insanity, and things that just don't make sense, things that shouldn't exist. These two things can't coexist. They shouldn't coexist. And that's why the hero, at first, he has to go back to his father to work to pay for his father's medical costs, and he has to sacrifice his education. But he finds a substitute, which is, solving this crime and figuring out what Isabella Rossellini's character is involved with Dennis Hopper and the kidnapping and the crime and the ear that he finds and all. At first, it's like a game to him. And a guy who lives in a suburban neighborhood, the only entertainment they get is thrillers on television and film noir. That's probably, again, David Lynch, what attracted him to film noir. What's the real world like beyond your domain, beyond what your direct experience? And you can tell he's describing himself in Blue Velvet. He has the hero, who's the boy who plays Paul Atreides, of course. I forgot his name now. And he has the same hairstyle as David Lynch and the same baggy kind of clothes that him. And he's a voyeur. He's attracted to the dark side. And that's represented in Isabella Rossellini's character. The opposite, of course, is Laura Dern. She's that suburban, beautiful, wholesome world of truth and hope and cleanliness and nature. And, of course, the closing scene has a robin, a very fake robin, but eating one of those beetles. And the robins have won out against the dark side, so to speak. And he's learned to cope with his temptation and realize that this is not a game, this is deadly serious, and he should help those people who are stuck in that horrible world. Isabella Rossellini's character, who likes to be abused and likes to be slapped up, these kind of things, because she's gotten so used to it. And maybe there's a little of David Lynch in there too, because again, she's doing a performance in front of people, singing Blue Velvet, and that kind of sustains her and gives her a sense of self, which is probably what he's like too. And again, he probably sees himself to an extent in the Anthony Hopkins character in the movie, the Elephant Man, because he's somebody who's supposed to be a good man helping a less fortunate person, but now he's become like a kind of carnival with a freak show, and that's what makes him famous. And that's the temptation that every director and artist faces, which is to sell out or to do beautiful art. And David Lynch hates himself for selling out while making Dune. I think he didn't sell out, to be honest. I think he did a good job. He did the best he could, and he snuck in enough of himself, and in a way that was organic to the story. Also, you can see some of the Elephant Man in the sequence with the Spacing Guild navigator and the Spacing Guild vessel is massive, and the architecture, which is very Gothic. And wouldn't you know it, you have Gothic architecture in the Elephant Man, and John Merrick is making the cathedral, a sort of scale model of the cathedral out of paper or something like that, and it's Gothic. So again, David Lynch is imprinting so much of himself onto the world of Dune, but in a way that actually fits with the world, and in some ways takes it a step further than Frank Herbert. I would still say that Jodorowsky took it even further and understood it even better than Frank Herbert, but David Lynch was up there, and he's pushing in that psychedelic direction and this embrace of nature and the family and wholesome relationships, as opposed to technology and mindless progress and machines and pollution and decadence and oil stains and filth and these kind of things, and glorying in filth because of the power and the money that comes with it. But that's great. I mean, I always say that there's a very thin line between self-exploration and self-indulgence. Thank heaven, I mean, people like Kafka, self-exploration. I'd say Woody Allen, self-indulgence, to be fair. David Lynch, self-exploration. So I think that's it. I don't think I can say any more, and you probably can't see me in the lighting here. So, Emad, over and out.